Well, I'm really excited. So I have to confess, I had heard of your podcast a lot, and I'm really bad. I do a podcast. I don't really listen to many podcasts. I love
Yeah.
them, but I just don't get the
Yeah.
time. And so
Yeah.
I'd heard of your podcast, and I've gone, at some point, I'm going to check this podcast out solely based on the premise of the name. I'm excited. And I hadn't got around to it, and it was only because I had so many of my patrons going, dude, could you have Bradley on? Like he's great.
Oh.
Like you want to have him on. And so and then I just started hearing your name more and more over the last kind of couple of months, and I was like, okay, I really need to kind of start exploring your work stuff. And I'm excited. I mean, just kind of reading a bit about you, listen to a couple episodes, seeing what some of your books are about, seeing some like little pieces that you've written here or there. I'm like, oh, this is going to be a fun conversation. We get excited about a lot of the same things. So I'm really excited.
No, it's same thing to you. I've heard it's the same thing. Like always trying to tell me, hey, Phil's doing this amazing stuff. Other people, it's a very similar story. So that's very cool. Yeah.
We all are juggling so much stuff, and there's so many people in this space now, which is really exciting because it doesn't feel like that's always been the case. I think a lot of it is just discovering new language, creating new environments that people gather around. And I don't think this is a new phenomenon too much, actually. But it's exciting. So I am all ears this episode. I do talk a lot, so brace yourself.
Okay.
But I really want this to be the Bradley Show. I want it to be whatever you want to say, however you want to be. You can say it however you want to say it. You can cuss, you can dance, you can swear, you can do whatever you want.
Sounds good.
You can't shock my audience. And if you do, I'd be delighted. There's a bonus prize if you manage to shock enough of them. And so, just be yourself, enjoy yourself. How are you doing for time? I want to really make sure we don't push your day too much. I know you've had a long day as it is.
I'm good for 90 minutes or so. I don't know if that's enough time. Is that enough?
That's great. Okay. No, that'll be great. Well, we'll probably get there and then realize, it's so unfair, we have to finish up. But it depends. If it's dragging, we'll finish up before. That's
fine too. That's fine. And I feel bad because I know you're up late. So I hope that I hope you're okay.
I usually go to about 3 a.m. So
God,
the perils of working predominantly with Americans, and so
I've been there. I mean, UK, and
well, I saw that in your I saw a bio somewhere of you that you grew up in California, involved in California, youth pastor, all that kind of stuff, but also you'd lived in the UK, you'd lived in France. We're just starting, by the way. I don't even know. I'll at some point find a point where I cut, but what was that like for going from the world of American Christianity and the American culture? Had you traveled much before you moved over to the UK?
No, I had not. And couple things. So I grew up in Southern California, and then I went to Azusa Pacific University, which is only half an hour from where I grew up. And I was in full-time ministry as soon as I got there. So by the time I was 18, I was in full-time ministry. I was a full-time student. If you fast forward 2 years later, I'm at the same church, but now I've been elevated to the full-time youth pastor. So I'm now 20. I'm married. I'm in full-time ministry, and I'm a full-time student. If you fast forward about 3 more years, my then partner and I are just feeling claustrophobic. We have been in the same church, the same town, the same place, adult life, and we need something new. Well, as an athlete, a basketball player, I wanted to study theology. This was my way out. My way out of being a minister, of being a missionary. I thought this is an acceptable path. Become right. And so we decided we were going to try to do an adventure. So let's apply to places in the speaking world, and maybe it'll work out. So I looked in various places, looked at Australia, looked at wherever, but decided on the UK. And my trip outside of North America was in 2004. And we went to London and Oxford and Edinburgh, and we're just wide-eyed, annoying Americans who had no idea what was going on in the world at all.
And a good time to be traveling as an American coming to Europe. Oh my. Best time to come, 2004, right in the middle of like George Bush, Iraq, everything.
Yeah. No upset about that at all, believe me. Yeah. It was bad. People and it was bad. And so I had set these meetings with professors, and I get to Oxford, and I have no business being there. I don't come from a family where I went to a small Christian college. I am not supposed to be at Oxford University, and we are very intimidated. I'm wearing a suit and tie, which I'm overdressed, as Americans usually are, overdressed at the wrong time and underdressed at the other time. And I go to meet this very famous theologian whose books I had read in preparation. And my ex-wife had come with me. And when he was coming to the door, he's the Regent's Park College, Oxford. She panicked because she was in a t-shirt and ready for this meeting, and she didn't know what to do. So he opens the door and he says, "Oh, Bradley, hello, you've come a long way." And I said yes, and I didn't know where she went. And I thought, okay, I guess she just was able to hide, and now we're gonna go inside and talk to the. And then he says, "Bradley, before we go in, I want to know who's in the shrubs." And I look over, and she's just hiding in the shrubs, like waving at us.
That's incredible.
So she comes in, and she was an English major, and they had a great talk about 19th century British literature. And I think that's the only reason I was ever admitted to Oxford University, was that whole event. So that's how that happened.
The crazy woman hiding in the shrubs kind of like won them over for you. Yeah.
Yep. That's how I got to do that. Yeah.
It's so true. If you've ever been involved in hiring, sometimes you get through enough people that it is, who was that guy? Oh, the guy who had the woman hiding in the bush.
Yeah,
he was great. Yeah, like that's enough of the trigger that you became much more memorable than the guy that just was wanting to transfer across from Cambridge or something, you know, or whatever. Yeah. Also a rower or whatever else they're looking for at Oxford.
I had no business being there, none, and yet somehow it worked out. Yeah. So
yeah, wow. So were you quite immersed still within your kind of conventional Christian beliefs and things when you went over to the UK?
Yeah, I was. I really thought of at the time, my plan was to study Trinitarian theology. So I was going to study Karl Barth and Jürgen Moltmann, and without getting into theological weeds, evangelical, those are kind of the pushing the limits a little bit. When I would tell people
those are the bad
that
boys.
I was interested in Karl. Oh yeah, I mean, it was like I was a rebel, and you look back and you're like, Karl Barth, that's the rebel. But so very soon after moving there, it was clear. All of a sudden, I'm 6,000 miles from home. We are out of ministry for the first time in 7 years, right? Able to explore what it is we actually think and believe, and who we want to be in the world. And very soon it became clear that my faith was going to deconstruct way more quickly than I thought. I thought I would end up being like a liberal Anglican, liberal Episcopalian, maybe a social justice Methodist. I really sort of saw my path there.
Right.
That didn't happen. I quickly became allergic to church, just couldn't even sit through it. And our relationship just changed, and we realized we were best friends rather than as partners. Very quickly, she left. God left, and my two soulmates were no longer in my life. The two ones were gone, and I was just sort of figuring it out. And so I went from Karl Barth to like French phenomenology and French philosophy. From Karl Barth to Derrida, and that was really when the folks at home knew. They knew then. I had lost it. It was over at that point.
You're reading Derrida, the shit has hit the fan.
Yeah, it was bad.
Nobody gets Derrida. Like, you just read that for like, I don't know, existential dread and despair. What? Yeah.
No, when I don't read much Derrida now, but when I do, I'm like, I'm gonna die soon. Why am I wasting my time trying to figure what this? I should go drink a beer on the beach. Why am I trying to figure out what this says? So anyway,
I love it. It's amazing. Yeah, well, I guess there's so many different triggers that can do this for people, right? I mean, there's big political things like Trump or the pandemic or maybe the war in Iraq, right? It was a big thing for a lot of people, and these kind of things where you got Bush saying we're going to bomb the wall to hell in the name of God, and it's suddenly some Christians go, wait, bombing people in the name of God? That doesn't click, or whatever it might be, and that's why, it might be that you have a son that comes out gay. It might be that, whatever, these different things. Black Lives Matter explodes, and you suddenly are aware of this conversation. It's been going on forever, and that triggers you. But it seems such an innocuous, like such an innocent thing to travel and just to visit a new place. And it can be such a spark. And I know you've got a lot going on here. You know, you're going through a lot as you're going into a secular university to explore kind of religion and philosophy and these kind of things. So that's a big deal. But also just going into a different world. The UK, you know, is a very different place to the US in a lot of ways. Certainly, as far as the religious makeup, you suddenly show up on the shores of a country that largely is atheist at that point, early 2000s. Talk to me about some of the kind of key components that like maybe cause things to start to fall apart. Like, you know, if you want to go, I don't know how much you've told this story as well. And so if you feel like, oh gosh, this is a bit done, we'll obviously touch on interesting points, but we can dive into some other stuff as well. So we won't stay and tell your life story all the time. So.
Oh, I'm happy to talk about it. You know, this is going to sound strange, but my college, Oxford, was a Baptist college. It's the only sort of non-Anglican college, and it's strange to people that actually I think helped me, because Baptists are not like American Baptists. So when I got there, a lot of the people I met were theologians, were training to be theologians, training to be Baptist ministers in the UK, drank alcohol. Many of them were affirming of LGBTQ folks. Many of them were not into purity culture. Right. And all of a sudden it was kind of a soft landing for me, that instead on the shores of a sort of secular humanist, you know, place that was rife with things that I didn't know, these people were very familiar. They were Baptists. They were trying to be in ministry. They wanted to serve Jesus. And yet they drank alcohol. They were LGBTQ affirming. They weren't into purity. They talked openly about sex and relationships in ways that I was like, oh, that doesn't sound okay. And all of a sudden, I started to rethink everything. And like I said, I really thought because of them, I would end up, you know, a Baptist or a social justice Methodist or a liberal, you know, Anglican. And I went to those churches, was there. And then all of a sudden I realized, hey, you know, I believe in social justice and I believe in affirming people. And I believe in all those things. And I just don't need to get up on Sunday to go affirm it. And to go proclaim it. I'm actually good. And I'm not, that's no criticism of folks who do. It just means for me personally, I realized within about 6 months, oh, I'm going to sleep in on Sunday. I haven't done that in 11 years. I'm going to sort of explore how I can make the world better, but not do it through the church. I'm going to do it in ways that are going to work for me. And the freedom there was so new. It was so to feel like I could explore every avenue of theology, philosophy, but also social practice. And this is sounding weird, but it almost helped me that I was doing so in a Baptist environment. It's almost like when you let a kid play at a playground and there's a fence around the playground and you're like, okay, just, you're good within the fence, go see it. And then when they're old enough, they see, you know, without supervision. I needed that sort of like free. Well, and I still, you know, I still have very warm feelings towards Regent's Park College at Oxford, which, you know, I notice some people may seem a little strange because it's a very Baptist place and I've deconstructed fully. I'm no longer a Christian and all that stuff, but I look at it as a place that helped me understand that there was a new way of being in the world. And I also give it credit for opening my eyes that there are ways to be a person of faith that are not as toxic as you know, how I view many evangelical spaces and other spaces. There's people who are trying to be people of faith, who are LGBTQ affirming, who are recognizing complicity with white supremacy and so on and so forth. And so that helped me a lot. And it really set me on the path where I'm today, which is not even as a theologian. It's a scholar of religion who has just a completely different approach to his work. But that's kind of how it happened at the start. It also set me on a path. And I think maybe this is something we can talk about too, is I really had to figure out who I was apart from my wife. I mean, we were high school sweethearts, you know, in the Christian evangelical frame, we were soulmates. We were meant to be together. We were our only real relationships that either of us had ever had. We had done the purity culture thing. We had been pretty close to you know, getting through unscathed on the purity culture scale. And all of a sudden I'm divorced and I'm like, I have no Christian identity. I mean, the people at home lost their minds. I mean, my old mega church, they just could not understand what had happened to Brad in 6 months. I mean, good Lord, you got divorced. We see MySpace pictures of you drinking beer. You are out here studying French philosophy. You have really turned from the golden boy of the mega church youth ministry into this this person we're warning our children about, so that happened pretty quickly.
It's incredible to me. And I think it's interesting, that trajectory, because I work with people, and my job is helping people go on this journey, whatever it looks like. And as you said, people end up in different places, right? But it feels like a huge portion of people almost have an idea. Once they start to see this ball rolling, they've got an idea, and almost always the idea is, oh, I'm just going to become probably a more progressive Christian. And often it's because maybe some of the key issues on the table are things like social justice and certain things like that, which, of course, more progressive Christian spaces are going, well, yeah, we still believe X, Y, and Z about God, but we would like to include some Black people a bit more in leadership. And we believe this way, about God, but we're not going to be homophobic and transphobic. And so for a lot of people, that kind of ticks the boxes. They're not overly debating the kind of the existence of God or the structure of atonement or, anything like that. They're just kind of wanting to be a bit more open and inclusive and loving. It's kind of a bit of a tri-idealism, like, they want to be a bit more like Jesus, and they have to kind of leave their churches to do it.
That's right.
But it's fascinating to me how quickly that occurred. Like, I mean, that's a rapid spiral. I mean, I work with people all the time, and I would say 6 months is a pretty quick spiral as far as most people's journeys. Often that takes years to unravel and kind of flesh out, and people are doing that. Do you think that was because you were in such kind of an intellectual space as well, that you were doing that work kind of like in your day-to-day as well? You had the space, the time, or do you attribute it to other things? I mean, your divorce, I mean, that speeds things up. That asking questions.
That'll change your identity, right? All of a sudden I was a different person in my own mind, right? Just because of the divorce. So that was one thing. I would say another, though, is the intellectual part of me means that I always do things so hardcore and so extremely that I ruin them, right? That's what I always say. Like, I'm the oldest brother. My middle brother, he converted to Christianity, was able to sort of become this, as I've said, progressive Anglican. That's where he is today. He's a middle brother. He never went so hard into purity culture and youth group and ministry that he ruined it. And I'm being kind of facetious here, but I am so built that, like, whatever I do, I'm going to like learn everything there is to know about it. I'm going to read every book. I'm going to listen to every tape. And so when I started to deconstruct, it was like, okay, let's read all the theology. Oh, there's a social gospel. Cool. Let's read all of it. There's Christologies that say that Jesus was not this cosmic Christ who was wielding hell over everyone. He was an inclusive, justice-oriented, radical. Great. And by the time that 6 months was over and I digested all that theology and all that philosophy, and I'd read about every denomination and where we got Methodism and where we got Baptists and where we got Presbyterians, and it was like, okay, I'm good. I'm done. I've realized I've cataloged it all. I've got all the index cards and the binders, and I'm done. I am no longer going to go. I'm going to try to explore the world in every way I can. I want to ask questions about meaning and transcendence and love. I want to ask questions about authenticity and care. I want to form community with people who are doing the same, but I'm just not going to do it at church. I think I'm just good now. And that's kind of how it went. And don't get me wrong, the emotional fallout of the divorce took much longer than 6 months, but I think intellectually I got there pretty quickly. Yeah.
Yeah. What drew you to kind of French philosophy? I mean, obviously, French is a juggernaut of philosophy. I mean, it really is. The French love to sit around and think. It's all the wine and bread. I mean, what else are you going to do while consuming huge, baguettes and drinking wine? But I mean, you're in England. There's some phenomenal English philosophy that you could explore. Scottish philosophy, there's especially reading some of your stuff. I mean, I know you kind of exposed a lot of postmodern philosophy. I mean, there's a lot of great postmodern philosophy outside and beyond France. Like, what was it that drew you to that kind of avenue? Like, what ideas and thoughts were grabbing you at that time?
I was really interested in the fact that so many French philosophers were atheist. They had accepted the death of God,
Mm.
And yet they were still completely preoccupied by questions of transcendence and questions of sacrality, right? So they wanted to understand how life could be sacred, even though God is dead. And that is I just, that's what I wanted to explore, right? I mean, okay, so God is dead, and yet life can still be sacred. How does that work? And that's how I got there. So I did my work in England. I went back to the States, but then I actually ended up in France twice to study and to learn, and got a degree there because, like I said, I do things so extremely I ruin them. So of course that's what I did, and ended up basically writing a dissertation on French philosophers who were atheists and yet were heavily invested in like 14th century mystics. Like why, as you said, why would a French philosopher sitting in a cafe smoking a cigarette and drinking an espresso be reading a 14th century mystic? And it was all because they wanted to understand how life could be sacred, even though they had divested themselves of any belief or practice when it came to a theistic God.
Unpack that for me. Talk about life being sacred. Like what does that look like in your eyes? I know I'm asking incredibly I'm giving you nice simple balls to hit because I know you've got a book about this and everything, but I'm fascinated because I think that can mean so much to so many people, and so many people even just hear the word sacred and go like,
for sure,
clean me off with a hose. I don't want that on me. And so talk to me about that. Like, you talk to me about how does a French atheist approach that? How does someone that's recently started to deconstruct and deconvert from their faith go, ooh, sacrality? Like, that sounds fascinating. I want to explore that.
Let's do it. So let's do it, and let's do it just for the hell of it. Let's do it through the Bible. All right. So let's just to piss everybody off.
Trigger warning for everyone that is not braced for that one. So people get plenty of Bible in here at times.
So we all know that the way we were taught is that when Adam and Eve sinned, that was the end, right? That was the plot twist that we're all still living through. Human beings have fallen, and that's terrible. That we all know is framed in a gendered way because Eve is supposed to be the harbinger of sin and the temptress who led to the fall of humankind. What if I said that when Eve took a bite of the fruit, that human beings enter temporality for the first time? That instead of living in this sort of timeless garden where in fact they were children, where in fact they were thoughtless, where in fact they were dependent, where in fact life really meant nothing because nothing was at stake, that all of a sudden they entered into a place where they are human. And to be human means that you are temporal, right? So Eve is not the temptress who led us into our fall. Eve is the mother who gave us our human condition for the first time. And we are temporal. So we're all born here without a choice. None of us chose it. We showed up here, and now we got to deal with it. And it's oftentimes fucking awful. We all know it. You show up here without a choice, and now you have to deal with the fact that you're here. And that's hard. You live from an event you never experienced, a birth that defines you, and yet you don't remember. You can't really place in terms of your own consciousness, and yet it defines the fact that you're now here. Because we're temporal, we're all living towards an end, a death that we don't want, we didn't choose, and yet it defines every moment of our life. So I'm living from this birth I didn't choose and I can't remember. I'm living toward a death that I won't know, because when it happens, I won't be here to know it, and I won't experience it because when it happens, I won't be here to experience it. I'm living in between two poles that define me. They stretch me into the past and into the future. And I'm always caught in the tension between them. And that's really, really, really hard. It's really hard to be aware of ourselves, to be aware of others, to be aware of death in the way that we are as human beings. You know, when I feed my dog at night, I'm amazed at the joy he takes. And just every time I put the bowl down, he's just so happy. We go on a walk, he's happy. And that acute awareness of other people, of death, of himself, right? None of it's there. And we know that being human, and I don't have to explain this to anybody, is just tragic. It's full of pain. It's full of vulnerability. It's full of unexpected events that define us. A diagnosis, a pandemic, an accident, right? being human can feel like a curse. It really can. And yet, right, if Eve never enters us, gives us birth into temporality, if we never enter into this condition, then there's no possibility for love, for celebration, for breaking bread in a way that's more than just putting food in your mouth, that's sharing a table with other people, opening a home, having a conversation, learning about each other. There's no sense of beauty. There's no experiencing the sunset, climbing to the summit and looking over. There's never a moment of catching up with an old friend, sitting on a park bench and feeling a sense of togetherness. There's no sense of waking up next to someone you love, with whom you've shared reciprocity and care and moments of vulnerability and fragility. Every time that we are just doomed to this curse of being human, I try to remind myself that every time we dance, every time we love, every time we sing, every time we break bread, our lives are sacred. And we can look to the universe and say, fuck you for making me a human. It's a curse. And we can also say, fuck you, I'm a human. And you know what? I'm not going to let that curse take away the sacrality of my life. I am going to dance and sing and love in ways that defy that curse. And I'm going to do it as long as I can.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way of looking at it. Well, I mean, I don't know, maybe some people would get very upset about the way of looking at it, I'm sure. But I think you're right. And I think, a lot of people talk about, Adam and Eve, that whole poem really being about the emergence of what it is to be a conscious human, to be, to know right and wrong, to be aware, to suddenly witness what is life and go, oh, whoa, there's something going on here and I can judge that, I can experience that. If you look at it in kind of developmental terms, I'm reading quite a lot. I'm always reading a lot of developmental theory, but right now I'm reading a little bit about really early developmental theory, babies, toddlers, and it's so fascinating. And I'm reading one person, and she just threw away this comment. And she was like, "Well, it's really only until really about the age 4 that you really have a conscious awareness that the other person." There's an awareness that the other person exists around the age of 2, but it's only at the age of 4 that, and this is usually in females as well. It's in males, it even takes longer generally if you're going to be as binary as this, but whatever the reasons, that seems to be the case. About 4 or 5 years old, they start to go, oh, and this other person has a different psychology. It's at that point that they go, oh, there's another person, and it's not just that person's over there and I'm over here. It's that person doesn't think what I'm thinking. That takes 4 years. And they just threw this comment away, and they said, which means that any child under the age of 4 has zero capacity for love. And I was like, whoa, don't tell that to parents. They're going to get really pissed off at the idea that the kid doesn't love them, right? So if you're a parent, listen to this, your kid loves you, don't listen to me. It's totally great. Yes, that is absolutely an expression of love when they say, I love you, mommy, and it's not just them parroting a sentence that you gave them, etc. Please, please, please ignore my veiled sarcasm. But I listened to it, I was like, gosh, it's so true. And so, and it made me think. I went back to, if this a garden analogy is an analogy for this development. And I'm like, Adam and Eve couldn't even love each other. Yeah, they couldn't even love God. And so we look at this as the paradise that we want to return to. Christianity is always looking back, going, how do we drag humanity backwards? 6,000 years, obviously, that period of time. But really, it's about and maybe we romanticize earlier development. Maybe we look at the toddler and go, oh, they just didn't know the world was hard and how perfect it was. And I'm like, God, toddlers spent the entire time crying. What do you mean they didn't have any form of suffering or, and so it does make me wonder. I'm just like, gosh, we need that development. We need that move forwards to experience life in its depth and its fullness. And gosh, we need to move beyond that even potentially. Maybe there is further development, just as there are in our development beyond a 4-year-old, hopefully, that we start to experience more depth to life, more, we can experience life as metaphor and not just as the literal black and white, dirt and dust that we pick up, and I love that. It's beautiful.
Well, and what you said to me is so indicative of what a garden is, right? And so as you're saying, so often we're taught theologically that the Garden of Eden is this static thing that existed. Like you just go there and there's just fruit and, it's 70, the weather is perfect. No one has to wear clothes because the weather is so good. And it's just this static sort of dream of an existence.
Right.
Anyone whose garden knows that the joy of gardening is that every day there's something to do. You have to create meaning and order in your garden every day. You have to, it depends on the season. Are you pruning? Are you planting? Are you seeding? Are you harvesting? But gardening is always in motion. You never as a gardener are like, well, I'm good for 2 years. We'll just let that go and come back later, right? I mean, gardening is constant, right? A constant activity, constant attention, constant care. To be human to me is it's hard. I mean, gardening is, you're on your knees, you're in the dirt, it's tough work, you're sore, but it's so fulfilling to see that kind of order and beauty that you can bring through that work. You know, to be a human is a hard condition. It's in many ways an irresolvable condition. And yet it's one that can involve so much beauty and so much depth, as you just said, that for me, that's what I hold on to. That's what I hold on to when I say that I think life is sacred, even if I don't mean it in a kind of monotheistic context.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a huge thing though, because I think, you know, you talked about, you know, divorce, your identity's torn apart, losing your faith, your identity. I mean, our identity is so interwoven into all of these things. And one of the things that is interwoven with our identity, with our faith, with our marriage, right? We got married to our high school sweetheart and all these things, all of that stuff. It's so interwoven with this narrative of purpose and direction that Christianity gives you. And in my experience, a lot of people really struggle as things start to fall apart. One of the big things that they really struggle with is going, oh shit, like, well, what is the meaning of this? What is the purpose? Like, why did I marry this person actually? Now I think about it, you mean I could have married someone else? Oh, actually, that sounds much better, right? Or whatever, right? What do you mean I just worked for free for a church for 10 years and was a missionary for 8 years and now I don't even believe in it? Like, what meaning is there to any of this? I've wasted my past years. I have no future at all because I have no education or whatever, even my great education. I'm just still in religion. Like, what job am I going to do now, right? You have to become a religious professor.
Well,
Shots fired.
Which is a whole no. I mean,
that's the burden of the pastor that deconstructs, or you know these paths of purpose that suddenly disappear. I think it's beautiful that you somehow segged into finding some meaning in life beyond religion. I think that's really quite profound. And I think a lot of people listening to this go, oh God, give me that, Bradley. How do I find that? How do I build that?
You know, one of the things I think that I've learned is evangelicalism taught me that life is about being saved. Like, we need to be saved from that's I mean, and anything, any book you read, any self-help, any Christian devotional, it's, you need to be saved from, and you need to be brought back to that garden-like state where there's no vulnerability, there's no threat, and you are firmly protected, as you said, like a child, right? The alternative, we're told, is always, it's either the one, right? You're either in the safety of the one who promises you that, right? Yahweh promising that to Abraham, Jesus promising that to the disciples. You're either saved with the one and protected, or you're out in the moving, scary waters of the many. And the many is meaningless. The many is nihilism. The many is a life without purpose, right? And it's a false choice. It's either the one or the many, and that's it. You choose. And if you leave, if you deconstruct, you're out there and it's a big, bad, scary world, and everybody's a secular humanist atheist. Their life mean nothing. They're just hedonists who try to get all they can, and then they die, and that's it, right? And I think for me, on a philosophical, theological level, that one and the many thing had to go away, because there's, as we've been talking about, there's authenticity, there's fulfillment, there is genuine human life in so many ways, from, as we said, writing a poem, having a conversation with a friend, meeting a new person that you can't wait to talk to, singing a song, you know, whatever it is, reading a book, great literature, right? People who create things. I mean, creating anything from a quilt to a house, whatever. There's ways of being human that are so generative. It also pervades how we think about love. I mean, the idea is it's either the one or the many. And so if you are not in the sort of safety of the Christian marriage, then your relationships will devolve into meaningless hedonism. And there's no choice. So it's you choose. Do you want to be in a really fulfilling biblical marriage, or do you just want to be out in the open waters of meaningless secular hedonism? And it's like, that's not how love works either, right? Love is not about the one, and it's not about being saved. I'm not God. I can't save anyone. And I don't think I'm dating anyone who's God. So I don't think they can save me. So I think we're going to have to reframe our understanding of love and care and romance if we're going to make that transition fully. And I think for me, that's always been important, because I lost both the ones at the same time. I lost God, the one, and I lost my romantic one pretty much simultaneously. And so those are always linked in my mind.
What do you think is the hindrance for people going on that path? Because I see a lot of people, generally speaking, and I have no problem with people that hold on to their Christian faith and find healthy ways to engage with any religion at all. But obviously, coming from my background, most people are coming from a Christian faith tradition. I have no problem with people that do, but I feel like a lot of the time in my conversations, and people are very open about this, they're clinging to that because they're really struggling to find some other alternative to start engaging with that other story other than the one. What do you think are some of our barriers to that, and how do you think we start punching through some of those barriers? Like, where do we find those answers? How do we come across those answers? I know that they might not solely be intellectual or anything either.
Yeah. I mean, do you mean in a, so we're afraid to let go of the one, because if we do, our lives in general will sort of devolve into chaos? Is that what you mean?
I think that's a big part of it. Yeah, I don't know. I guess there's probably a few different points where people find like a barrier. I think a lot of people are terrified of hell. Even though that I've had people tell me, I haven't believed in hell for 10, 15 years. And yet I still occasionally wake up with terrors and I'm soaking the bed with sweat. I'm freaking out about hell. And they're like, and I know, even if I was a Christian, I know hell is not the only option, and there's ultimate reconciliation or universalism or nihilism, but I'm not even a Christian. I don't even believe in God, never mind, that form of hell. And I'm still, so I think, it could be all sorts of things, but I think, there's all these different barriers that people have to walk through. And sometimes I wonder if it is those barriers themselves are so powerful, but sometimes I wonder if it is a lack of option on the other side that is perceived or seen. I guess, so let me ask it this way. Like, it feels like what's happening today is really quite unique in a sense because of largely, in my opinion, globalism in the internet. In that, if you look at Europe, we had our mass falling away of Christianity between 50, 70 years ago, maybe a bit later as it sort of drags into maybe some countries, Germany, England. But we had that mass falling away. But it doesn't feel like there was the same kind of experience as there is today. It felt like there was that kind of duality. It was like, look, you're in Christianity, and if you're not, you're probably an atheist, and that's basically your two options. Maybe you're an agnostic, but that's it. And people were, well, I'm not a Christian anymore, so I guess I'm that. And it was a very like flick from one to the other. And that doesn't seem to be happening today. And I think there's positives to that. And I think there's sometimes negatives to that. It feels like there's maybe paralysis with, well, where do I find options? How do I find? I think people still need some sort of, they want to find a meaning that they can go, no, that is the meaning then, I guess.
Yeah.
Do you have thoughts on, I mean, I don't even know if I even managed to ask a question in my 4 questions.
Oh, no, for sure. No.
Thoughts on that world of words I just threw at you?
I do. No, I very much do. So I think there's, for me, in my experience, there's a couple things at play. One is there's such a bogeyman built up in evangelical circles, so that you're taught if you dare step out of the bunker, you're going to run into just very scary wolves. They are going to devour you. And so if you dare leave, if you dare deconstruct, if you dare sort of explore friendships or explore career options or explore community options, taking your kid to a different school, taking your kid to different activities, whatever it is, then you are going to be devoured by the ferociousness of the world and the meaninglessness of your life, right? And my experience has been, for those of us who do deconstruct, we sort of step outside tepidly, we put one foot out, and you realize, oh, my foot's not burning, I'm not in Hades, okay. Maybe 2 steps out. Oh, I met a new friend. they're not a Christian, and they were very nice and caring, and they wanted to bring me soup when I was sick, and they wanted to, have a play date with their kid and my kid at the park. I don't know, whatever it is. And you start to realize through experience, oh, okay, there are ways of being a human being in the world without running into these devouring wolves that I've been warned about my whole life. I think that first step is really hard. And I know for you, as somebody who works in these areas with folks, that's very clear. I think the second one is harder psychologically and philosophically, and that is, we have been trained to look for the final answer. We need it resolved. I remember talking to my dad one time, and he asked me why I was no longer an evangelical. And I said, Dad, it just is clear to me that there's no way to go to bed at night with every big question answered, tied up, put away in a drawer, and neatly resolved. That's just not a possibility for me anymore. Because of that, I have to live with provisionality. I have to live with the fact that life includes vulnerability, it includes fragility, but that is what makes it in many ways exciting and many ways thrilling. And it also makes it, as we've talked about, difficult and at times hard to cope with. But if you are looking for the final meaning, if you're looking to tie it all up and resolve it, you're always then going to be caught in communities and in religious groups that are offering final answers and thus have total control over you. If you want final answers, you have to give up total control. And so that to me is a way to sort of frame why it is so many of us are stepping out from those communities, but maybe also why it's a motivating factor to just give it a chance to live with the provisionality, live right with this, the fact that something's always at stake. Something's always at stake in your story. We all love, like, how many of us read books where we just know what's going to happen and what the end's going to be? We don't like that. We don't watch films that way. Your story becomes yours when you step out of that community, and something's always at stake. And now you have a chance to create this narrative of who you are and what you'll be. That's exciting. That's so tantalizing. It's so freeing. It comes with the fact that you have a condition that is not fully resolvable. That's your human condition. That's tough, but I think there's a lot of beauty in it.
Yeah, absolutely. I love Pete Holmes. I love Pete Holmes. He's such a great guy. But he has kind of like an analogy of seeing his life like a TV show, and every day is an episode. And, at the end of the day, no one wants to watch the episode of TV where Pete's life is perfect. And everything goes the way he planned it. His calendar just works out, TikTok, everything's ticked. He sat and watched Netflix for 4 hours. No one wants to watch that, right? People want to go, oh my gosh, this is the one where, I'm using Pete, this is the one where Greg's mom gets cancer. Holy crap, that was a crazy good episode. Like, you see how he processed that, and it was so painful, it was so hurtful. Oh, like, it's terrible. How on earth, what's the next episode? How is he going to overcome this? How is he going to get through this? Will his mom, and no one wants anyone to get cancer. Like, duh. I'm not saying that at all. But these huge ups, these huge downs, and everything in between is what makes it a good show. Right? On some level. No one wants to watch the Garden of Eden TV show. No one wants to go to heaven as described by an evangelical, right? These places are so dull, so uninteresting. And so, I think that's hits it on the head. There needs to be some ambiguity. There needs to be some room for things to go terribly awry. But for every bit of space you give it to go awry, there's a bit of space for it to go incredibly well and totally different and exciting. And I love that. I really love it.
There's this episode in the Odyssey where Odysseus ends up on Calypso's island, right? And Calypso is a beautiful goddess. And Odysseus, of course, in the Odyssey wants to go home. He's trying to get home from the Trojan War to his wife Penelope and all this stuff. And he's lost in this maze of islands and monsters and all this stuff. But he ends up on Calypso's island. Beautiful goddess. She has a warm place to live, and there's food everywhere. There's fruit growing on the vines. There's plenty to eat inside, and it's a tropical paradise. Beach, food, goddess who says, Odysseus, how about I make you immortal? You stay with me forever on this island. We will make love every night. We will eat great food every day. then we'll go to the beach, then we'll hit repeat. What happens in this part of the Odyssey is Odysseus spends every day weeping on the beach alone because he's so sad, because his life means nothing. All he wants to do is re-enter time and go chart his path with his family. And to me, what you just said about evangelical heaven is akin to death, right? It's akin to not being alive. And so if we're going to be alive, we have to face the sort of unpredictability and uncertainty of our condition, and revel in the times when we can revel, dance when we can dance, celebrate when we can celebrate, smile when we can smile, say I love you when we can say I love you, knowing that there will be days when we can't. There will be the episode, as you just said, where someone's in the hospital, when we get bad news, when something doesn't go great, and there's nothing we can do to change that. It's just a matter of sort of balancing, the sacrality of our condition with its inherent sort of tragedy, and it's not easy. I recognize that's hard, and it's not something that can be done all at once. But I do think that one more analogy is I grew up surfing in California, and I love surfing. One of the reasons I love it is because you never know what you're going to get. So you can check the wind and the swell and the tide, but when you're driving there, you know that there's a chance you're going to pull up and it's going to be perfect. Perfect wind, perfect tide, perfect swell. Only 2 people out there surfing, and here you are. It's going to be a great 3 hours, right? And there's other days you show up and it's not what it said. The tide is bad. The swell never came. There's 100 people out there. And you know what? You're like, this wasn't great. But you never know, right? Every day is different. Every wave is different. Every time you surf is different, because the wind, the tide, the swell, the temperature, all of those things change all the time. That's what makes it so fun. That's what makes it so amazing, that every moment is different. Every moment holds something unknown around the corner. That's what is tantalizing about being alive. And yet, I think for me, evangelical theology takes all of that out and shoves us into this place where it's like, we want to make you dead. That's the goal. Let's be dead. Let's be protected in a way that nothing's at stake and nothing matters. And that's a good life. And like Odysseus, it just makes you want to kind of go cry on the shore.
Yeah. I think there's a component, I think, as moderns, or maybe even postmoderns potentially, I feel like there's a danger of us writing off that whole way of life as completely meaningless or irrelevant or not helpful. But I think if we go far enough back in history, we can go, oh my God, there was a time where that was such a move forward. When there was a time when human history was crazy, anarchy, very unstable. We didn't know what was going to happen next. And it was, yes, it was all those uncertain things, but just bad, right? I mean, there was no, oh, I can't wait for the wonder of what today is. It was like, fuck, this might be the day I die, or hopefully I just scrape through, and I'm kind of being a bit silly, but like, there was a time where we transitioned on some level, and we needed stability and safety and organization and people in charge and leadership structures, and it created civilization. It created order, and it helped civilization grow and develop and whatever. And so I think that's I think that's something we overlook at times. But I do think that time is over on the whole. I maybe in certain parts of the world that might still be actually very helpful, and we might even be seeing certain parts of the world still need some greater emergence of some stable kind of structure and organization. Absolutely, I can well imagine that some people in the world would look forward to that. Some days I look forward to that. If I've had enough days of craziness, I'm like, oh God, I would like a nice, stable, organized everything. Someone picks my day for me and gives me how it is, and I just have it. But what do you think is next? So I know you've looked at this, and you've looked at you've studied philosophy, you've studied religion. Like, does religion play a role in the future? Does religion need to change if it's going to play a role in the future, or is religion going to die off and be replaced with a more secular kind of philosophical way of engaging with the world and creating a sacred kind of meaning to the world? What do you see happening? What do you see unfolding now? Where do you see us going? Like, what are your thoughts?
I think they go in 2 directions. So I think we're seeing the US in ways catch up with Europe, as you mentioned. So we have a huge tide of the nuns, the NONES nuns in the US now, and they're the fastest growing group. what we're seeing is the kinds of control, the kinds of hierarchy, the kinds of authoritarianism, the kinds of hypocrisy that are often rife in, not all, but in many religious communities, are turning many people off from that kind of participation. We've seen that all over the world. We've seen that take place in Europe. We've seen that take place in especially the Nordic countries. And yet, I always come back to when I talk to my students about religion, I say, look, I don't care about what people believe. I do, but it's kind of my sixth or seventh question. My first question is, what does religion do? What does religion do? And what religion is really good at, and it's perhaps the best phenomenon in human history, is creating community, is creating a sense of purpose, is creating a sense of tradition and lineage. Religion is really good at that. And so I don't think religion will ever go away, because there are enough of us humans who want that kind of answer, who want that kind of togetherness, that religion will always stick around. I think what's interesting at this moment, this juncture, is can we form secular communities, secular forms of being together that are able to bring us into a sense of camaraderie, a sense of togetherness, a sense of participation, a sense of fulfillment as humans working together to create meaning in our lives, yet do it in a way that is not authoritarian, that is not toxic, that is not oppressive, in a way that we can pass on to our kids, in a way that we can sort of explore who we are in healthy ways. The rub there is the way you get that kind of cohesive community is through shared symbols and shared doctrines and shared rituals. Well, that requires everybody conform to a certain belief system and a certain ritual system, and you're off and running. The good thing about that, hey, it feels really good. I taught a class one time on atheism, and it was a night class with adults, and this older gentleman, 65 years old, raises his hand and says, I haven't been religious in 30 years, and I don't miss a damn thing about going to church and having some preacher tell me I'm going to hell. And then he just started crying, right? He starts crying. And he says, I do miss being together with people and singing. Atheists don't have songs, right? It's like an old Steve Martin bit. Mm-hmm. And I want to know, can we find ways to be together that don't require that religious dogma and ritual, but give us that sense of participation? Is that possible? I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, it's the huge question, right? Because as we see, this emerging group of nuns or duns, often very spiritual still, often having very different positions, atheist, agnostic, some exploring Eastern tradition, some going back to maybe indigenous roots and maybe their roots of practices that have been sacred to their ancestors and where they've come from. Some exploring within Christianity, but very different to their original faith tradition. There's such diversity there. And this is the problem in deconstruction. I created a network to help people connect, because people ask me all the time, do you know anyone from Austin? I feel totally alone. And I'm like, damn, I talked to like 5 people from Austin this week and I can't remember any of them. So it's like, fuck, screw this, right? I'll set up a website and everyone can just put their name on it and you can find each other. And then I have this issue where suddenly I'm like, someone messaged me like, oh, I'm in LA and I don't know anyone that's deconstructing. I'm like, have you checked deconstruction? There was like 50 people in LA. Like, come on, like, that's not hard. And they're like, yeah, I messaged them all and none of them are at the same place. And I'm like, oh, I hadn't thought of that. You're looking for someone that believes identically. Now, a lot of people aren't in that place, which is great. And it's definitely going to work for you better if you're not in that place. But there is this dynamic where on some level, some people are going, oh no, I need someone to believe the same way as me for me to really feel connected and feel that level of connection, because maybe that's socially in a constructed way. That's how we've grown up. That's how churches work. That's how our schools work, nations, whatever it is, I don't know. But it's there.
Yeah.
And it is a big question of going, well, can you herd cats? Right? Yeah. Can you get these people that are in a radically different space? I've gone to different areas and gone to like maybe somewhere in Atlanta and go, I'll just gather everyone from this area and like shoot out a message and say, I'm here. I'm going to rent this room. Come hang out with us. And everyone shows up, and then someone's like, oh, I brought my guitar. Can we sing some worship? And I'm like, fuck off, dudes. But then someone else is going, oh, that would be really nice. And I'm like, what? And then someone else is going, I really would rather not. That's triggering. And I'm like, thank God. And, you know, and then someone's like, oh, I would like to sing, but I'd like to sing secular. And I'm like, I just don't even care about singing music with you guys. I don't like singing music with people. Right. And then someone else is like, oh, well, why don't we just open in prayer? And I'm like, whoa, who are you praying to, dude? Or, you know, and then someone else is like, oh yeah, let's pray to Ganesh. Or, you know, like kind of joking with the most extreme kind of diversity. But how do you get a group together that want to gather around some form of ritualism and things like that? It's really hard. And so even though it's the fastest growing movement, spiritual movement in the West, and it's this huge emerging group, so many of us just feel utterly alone. We feel completely isolated, alone. And yet, I always say, if you turned into a Jehovah's Witness and just went out the front door, turned left, and started knocking on doors as you went and said, hey, did you used to be religious? You're not anymore, and you just want to hang out? I reckon you get about 4 doors, even in America, before you found someone that was like, yeah, dude, let's go to the pub, right? But once we get to the pub, how are we connecting? What are we connecting? Are we connecting over a common? I do wonder if it is a common departure that we're connecting over. But I don't know. Is that enough to connect over? Are we all used to believe like this and we don't anymore? It feels, I don't know. It's such a weird one.
It is. It's we have this trauma bond, right? We have this bond of like, we share that. So we all are moving away from this thing. And yet, can we find a way to move together towards something else? And it's not easy, because as you're saying, you get the room of 50 people. There's somebody who's still kind of Christian, but just in a much different way. You get someone who's like, if you start with any praying I'm out. I'm going to run. I mean, don't even think about it, buddy. And so, how do we do that? I think for me, we just started this new podcast collective called Irreverent Media Group. And the tagline is from deconstruction to rediscovery. And I like that, because I think it opens the door for thinking through these questions. What does it mean to rediscover? Does that mean that there's ways of rediscovering and renewing in community, in camaraderie, in companionship? What does that look like if we're all going to land in different places, if we're all going to land with different beliefs, different values? One of the things I talk about sometimes is, if you walk around my neighborhood, it's 90% people of color. It's very left leaning here in the Bay Area. So a lot of Filipino folks, a lot of Vietnamese folks, a lot of Mexican folks, a lot of Japanese folks, et cetera. And a lot of the yard signs say in this house, right, we believe love is love, science is real, everyone is welcome, blah, 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 blah. And I always think to myself, that's a creed. That's a creed.
Yeah, it is.
That's a creed. Can we start with something like that? Can we start somewhere where we affirm science, we affirm all identities, we affirm people where they are in terms of their sex and their gender, where we affirm, certain ideals that could bond us, and yet avoid the sort of dogma? Can we do value but not dogma, right? Can we do boundaries but not binaries? Right? That's hard. It's not easy work. And as you're saying, it's often like herding cats. But I agree with you that there's a lot of folks who feel alone. And part of what's hard about deconstruction is you're leaving probably the most intimate and cohesive community you'll ever be part of when you're an evangelical, even though it's probably the most toxic and suffocating community you'll ever be a part of.
So. Well, I mean, I always say, like, the Westboro Baptist Church is one tight family. Right? But you don't want to go join the Westboro Baptist Church for that tight community, right? Like, I mean, maybe you do. Hey, I don't know. But I would highly recommend opting for something different, right? Maybe the UK Baptist variety might be better for you. I grew up UK Baptist, so I mean, I don't highly recommend it, but
no, and my comments earlier about UK Baptist, believe me, there were folks who I met who were lovely, and then there were folks
deeply
who I met
deeply varied.
Yeah, and I thought, oh Lord, okay, I don't want to talk to you. You know what I mean? So, I did not mean to paint with too broad a brush there.
No,
I apologize.
I know you didn't. I know you didn't. Yeah, I think it's really hard, and I think as well, and so this is where it becomes really problematic. So I used to be a part of a church, and I was trying to help them kind of forge a path, which about 30 to 40% of the people in the church were deconstructing, were questioning their faith. Some were kind of more progressive Christians, some weren't, but they just loved the community and they wanted to hold on to that. And so we were trying to help shape this into a community that could kind of be a bit more pluralistic, that could kind of embrace everyone. But the problem you have with that is at some point you have to come to terms with the fact that when you create, so those creeds you give, they're beautiful, they're amazing, they're inclusive.
Yep.
So who isn't included?
Yep.
Exclusive people.
Yep.
By some nature, even though you might even say, well, we include exclusive people, but they exclude themselves, or, we could all sorts of different language. That's kind of more Brian McLaren kind of language or whatever. But at the end of the day, what we're basically saying is, oh, you hate gay people? You're not going to be really welcome here. Sorry, go find another place. There's plenty of churches that you will fit in like great over there. But there's some component of, again, when you're working with such diversity and such variety, even our creeds at some point will be too inclusive for someone, or will be too, even love, right? What does love look like? That's the Westboro Baptists, they say they love people. Yeah. Right. You go find, I don't know, Kenneth Copeland, Bill Johnson, John Piper, any big Christian summit that you can think of the name and go, oh, I know what they believe. They all would say they're motivated by love, but they would all say what love is and how that looks is slightly different. And so even with that, it becomes problematic again. Maybe someone's starting to explore a Buddhist path and they go, well, it's not very loving to eat meat in this way, or kill, or or whatever, and I know it's more complexity to Buddhism and more diversity within that, but it's really complex, this path. But I think it's better than nothing. I think it's a starting point to be branching out in, but it's a messy endeavor for sure.
And being exclusive is a bad word, right? It's not a word we like to hear. And yet the paradox of being human is, if we're going to create community, we have to create boundaries that include those in the group. And they say, hey, we're all part of the group. And the folks who are not in the group, they're not in the group. And that's what makes us different. We all sort of have the badge or the patch or the symbol or the totem. And yet we don't want to be exclusive. So many of us are coming from a place where, being exclusive was so hurtful, was so traumatizing. And so that feels like any move toward exclusion feels like, no, that's reverting back to that place where I used to be. And I'm not doing that. I'd rather just not be in a group, right? I think a lot of us would just say, okay, I will be somebody who bonds with folks over being an ex-evangelical, but I'm not going to go the next step to joining something that makes me affirm some sort of boundary and inclusion thing, because I don't want to leave anybody out, right?
Yeah.
It's hard. Somebody pointed out on Twitter the other day that there's a lot of great progressive churches out there. They are affirming. They have a politics that most of us can get on board with. And yet, have you ever found a progressive church that is affirming of polyamory folks, the polyamory community? I haven't, right? So if you're polyamorous, can you go to that, very progressive, UCC church or whatever church it is? You're probably excluded, right? And we're right back to square one. We're right back to where we started here. And it is a conundrum. It is difficult. And I am not, I'm not going to pretend as the religion professor or anyone else that I have some grand answer to this. I'm thinking about it all the time. I have a book I'd like to write on this very question, but it is one we're all going to have to continue to struggle through, because I also think at times it's okay to say we are going to exclude those whose values are based on intolerance.
Sure.
We exclude intolerance here, right? And that's tricky, but I think it's okay to say that, even though exclusion is not a hip word at the moment. So anyway.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think that, to be honest with you, maybe we could shift into some politics. I know you're a big fan of talking about different political topics and stuff, but I think this is ultimately the real core of the revolution and the rise of the right throughout the world, not just in America as well. The UK is seeing a resurgence over the last 15 years. Australia, massive. I think people like to demonize the right. They like to point the finger and go, the right is evil, the right is wrong. And probably, maybe, absolutely. I'm not saying they're not, but I think actually the resurgence is largely due to the errors and the failings of the left. And actually, there aren't that many hard right people out there. There aren't that many extreme racists burning crosses and wearing, you know, Ku Klux Klan hoods and things. But there's plenty of people willing to vote for that group because they hate the left so much. I think the reason Donald Trump got such a vote was he spent most of his time going, look at these stupid leftists. Look at the ridiculousness of some of their statements. Look at how extreme. They say you can't exclude everyone. Well, you have to exclude someone. You can't exclude the excluders. You know, you say that there's no truth. Well, that's a truth. You know, that's an absolute truth, that there's no truths. And so you know what? A lot of centralists go, you know what? That's true. Like these leftists have got some extreme reactions to some stuff that's definitely wrong, and they go to swung this pendulum. And I do wonder if, you know, like you're saying, there's not necessarily something wrong with going, okay, hold on though, no exclusion, really? We're going to say, oh, pedophiles welcome here and do as you will. No, of course we're not. So let's hold on and just go, no. We do have a policy of exclusion here. We have a policy of, hey, you are going to be included if you change, if you work on yourself, if you show some level of, you know, transformation and that you want to be a part of this and you've worked to change yourself. Absolutely. Murderers, pedophiles, etc. You are able to change and be included. But right now, no, you're not allowed to come in here and kill people, come in here and whatever. I think that maybe we are in quite a reactionary time right now. And I think actually it's possibly because of that a lot of our trouble today, as far as how much everything seems to have swung, I think a lot of people are in the center. I talk about this often in the podcast because I read it a few months ago, but have you seen perceptiongap.us? It's a website. It was a study that they did, and they basically they asked a huge group of Democrats, and they said, here's like 30 questions about your politics and different things like that.
Oh yeah,
give us your answer. And then they said, what do you think a Republican would say? And vice versa. And what it turns out was the vast majority of them basically answered within a couple of percentage points of each other. But what they thought the other person was like this psychopath demon, you know, that was the most extreme on the other end. And so I think there is this place of, if we can kind of figure out, okay, no, maybe there is some healthy exclusion here. Yeah, you're right. Like it does require exclusion to create a healthy community, but maybe we could be a little bit more inclusive than we have been in the past. Like let's start moving along and start opening up. What are your thoughts on this? Because I know you talk a lot about kind of the political landscape in the States. I mean, that's a heavy focus on your podcast, Straight White American Jesus. Talk to me about some of your thoughts on especially American politics, I guess. But if you want to expand globally, that would be interesting as well, for sure.
One of the things that we talk about a lot is that fundamentalisms seem like they are old, right? So if you say, I'm a fundamentalist Christian, I'm a fundamentalist Muslim, I'm a fundamentalist, whatever it is you want to call yourself, I'm a fundamentalist, pure nativist, you know, person from England. I don't want foreigners here. I don't want folks from, you know, from Pakistan or from the African continent or whatever. It seems like you're doing the thing that's like, I'm going back to the beginning. One of the things we talk a lot about is fundamentalisms are reactions to modernity, right? Modernity poses freedom and uncertainty and choice. One of the ways that people often react is to choose to form an identity around religion or politics or ethnicity or race that gives them certainty, right? It gives them categories. It creates a world of binaries, and it helps them just sort who's in and who's out, who's here, who's there, who is me and who is the other. So fundamentalisms aren't old, they're new. They are ways of constructing a vision of the past that helps you sort the world into neat categories. So a fundamentalist Christian does this, a white supremacist does this, and on down the line. The right politically is really good at that sorting. They present a world that says us and them, here and there, good and bad. Are you in or out? Get on board. The feature of that is conformity. The feature of that is they all vote the same. The feature of that is they're able to mobilize armies of voters and armies of political people because they have built the value system on those binaries and that in-group, out-group thing. The left is diversity is a feature, not a bug. So we all have different views. We all have different ideas about economic solutions, trade solutions, you know, political solutions. Okay, great. Everybody get in this big tent. And all of a sudden we're back in your room in Atlanta. Someone's playing the guitar. Someone's over here praying. Someone else is like, get me the hell out of here. And this whole big tent is a lot harder to mobilize because diversity is a feature and not a bug. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't want to be in a community that is an in-group, out-group community. I don't want to be in a place that says you're either here or there. You're either one of us or you're with them, the devil, right? I don't want that at all. But it's a reality politically in Poland, in the UK, in France, in the United States, in Hungary, that the right is really good at mobilizing because conformity is their value, right? I always say that I like In-N-Out Burger. I'm from California. In-N-Out Burger is like a favorite of mine. In-N-Out Burger's kind of amazing. You walk in, 2 choices, hamburger, cheeseburger. That's your choice, right? It's easy. And I never go to In-N-Out Burger and think, oh, do I want the fish sandwich? Do I want the tacos? Oh, maybe I want the salad. Not an option. And you know what? It's kind of nice because we've all been at a restaurant where we're like, too many good choices. What am I going to have? If I do that one, I don't get to have that one. If I do this one, I miss out on that. The right is In-N-Out Burger, right? There's no thinking, there's no choice. It's just you're with us or not. And I think politically we have to sort of accept that that's the starting point. And where do we go from here? What do we do about that? That's not easy, but that's our reality. There's always going to be a place for right-wing politics, just like there's going to be a place for religion because of what it does for people. It gives them certainty. It gives them easy ways to understand the world and a way to turn off your brain and just be part of the group. And don't worry about all the diversity and the array of choices and the bedazzling sort of heterogeneity of the world. Some folks want that, and they're always going to choose it.
Yeah. I mean, do you think we're just looking at in 20, 30 years, we will be the conservatives that are scared of new things change? We don't want those robots voting and, what do you mean? Like, AI rights, or what do you mean non-human rights? What does that even mean? Right. And so we're going to be sitting going, oh no, like let's conserve. Well, no, of course there's only, a plethora of genders for humans. You can't start saying there's other, I don't know. I'm trying to think of something that might be an issue.
It's good.
40 years from now. But I mean, do you think that's just the nature of humans? There's a group that is always looking backwards to some form of safety, security. Maybe there's something about growing older as well that maybe gravitates you, because there's a part of growing up sometimes that allows you to evolve beyond conservatism. And then there's a part of sometimes growing old that there's a lot of data and studies shown that as people start having their kids and start settling down and they start gathering property and savings and things like that, they suddenly become a lot more conservative. They're suddenly a lot more like, well, let's just keep a hold of everything we've got here. Let's keep our kids safe. I don't want my property just to be stable and increase by 5% every year. And I want my pension to be secure. I guess... Does the left change, or does it just continually become the cutting edge of what we're pushing for next, that becomes conservative next? Or do you think the left needs to change its approach? You talk about what the conservatives are there. It just works well in our system, in a very simple 2-party system. Gosh, the right seems to be very, very hooked up, because everything else seems a bit too risky. There's too many diversities. People split votes everywhere. The right is nice and simple. It goes, look, well, what do you want? Do you want babies to be murdered, or do you want to vote conservative?
That's right. That's right.
Whatever.
That's
it. And that's a real simple choice, and it captures a lot of people. I know people on the left that are sitting going, oh shit, I don't want to kill babies though. I mean, I've known people in my life that are very progressive in a lot of areas that go, yeah, but my pastor is right on some level. That is a big issue. Millions of people, if you honestly believe that, millions of people dying every year. Yeah, I guess I'd vote for something that stops that. If it ever stops it, right? Which another point, but
the example is right on. I mean, the abortion example is just a great way of sorting the world, right? Are you for the murder, the Holocaust, the millions of unborn children, or not, right? There's a scholar of religion named Robert Orsi who has this great phrase. He talks about disciplined attentiveness, and I like that, because what I like about it is, you get older, you start to have kids, and you want to protect, you want to preserve, right? You want to conserve, right? You become a conservative. Disciplined attentiveness to me is a willingness to say that no matter how old I grow, no matter how sort of scary the world seems, especially when I'm in charge of a little family or taking care of my aging parents or whatever it may be, that I'm going to have the disciplined attentiveness. I'm going to open the space within myself to examine, right, the questions before me that are really important, right? Do we have the willingness to expend energy on the most fundamental questions? One of the weird things about being human to me is that we're so often willing to spend so much energy on the things that are not fundamental. And when it comes to life's most crucial questions, refugees, immigrants, right, income inequality, white supremacy, abortion, on down the line, it's so intimidating and so confusing that we're willing to sort of just say, yeah, my gut tells me this, so I'll just do that. And I've got this person in my life and they seem smart, so I'll trust them, and they could be on Fox News or they could be my pastor, but I don't know what to do here, so I'll just go with that. Whether you're 30, you're 40, you're 50, you're 60, do you have the disciplined attentiveness, right, to say, okay, I'm not going to react with fear. I'm not going to let uncertainty drive me into intolerance. And I'm going to sort of live by the value, right, of expending my energy on the most fundamental issues. If we can be those people, then I think we can sort of not only build effective political coalitions, but we can not become the person who 20, 30 years from now is simply saying, well, in my day, we did it this way, and I'm just not going to get on board with all these folks. You know, I mean, I had a student today tell me about a supposedly feminist, professor at our school who is horribly transphobic, right? And this is a person who, was a queer woman in, the 70s and 80s, and her feminism, right, never got to the point of considering and in a disciplined way, paying attention to trans rights, trans people, trans issues. And so the student was just really devastated that taking this particular class with this particular person meant what felt like just an assault on trans people all the time, right? To me, that's a way to think about, do we have the willingness to exert our life's energy on the things that matter the most? Not easy, but it's worth it.
It feels like as time goes on, I'm very aware of how privileged I am that I have so much space to sit around and think about these things and have great conversations and read books and have a white privileged, circle jerk over like, oh, let's think about this philosophical issue or whatever. I mean, that's a very privileged position. But every day I feel like my life gets a bit busier and I have a little less time for it. And I don't even have kids yet. I mean, all these components adding up, and I'm like, oh gosh, yeah, I can see as time progresses. I was reading both Cook-Reuter and Lovinger's different models of ego development theory. And both of them at one point, I think it was in the late 90s, early 2000s, they were looking at these stages of ego development, how we grow up and how we frame our existence within the world as we grow. And what's interesting is both of them observed that generally speaking, whatever stage you're at around the age of 40, you basically died that stage. Very, very few people kept growing beyond the age of 40. And so as much change can happen in that space from birth right through to about 40. But once you get to around that age, whatever the reason was, they didn't put forward, these are the reasons or anything like that. I'm sure there's probably plenty of studies on these things. But it does feel at a certain point, people kind of stop growing up. They stop doing the hard work. I feel it in myself at times. We're having local elections right now for the mayor and different things like that. And honestly, I felt myself, I'm reading through the pamphlets and looking on the websites, and I'm literally pulling out my phone and texting my mate who's really on it with local politics going, who are you voting for, right? On some level, because I know we have the same passions, we have the same sort of output. And I'm just going to ask them, well, why? And if that seems reasonable, I'll probably vote that way. I don't have the time, I don't have the space, and I'm trying to pick which issues to care about and things and how to grow. And I have a lot of grace and forgiveness and compassion for people that are in that space.
Oh, for sure.
It's tough, right? I mean, thinking of feminists and 30 years ago, 40 years ago, how much they fought and had to fight for and do. on some level, I'm like most appalled and shocked that I'm like, what? You don't have, space for trans people and you haven't understood. And on another level, I'm like, oh, I get that you've come to a place in your life where you're like, I am done constantly educating myself and learning and fighting. I talked to a friend of mine the other day and they were saying they talked to their father, who I think is in their sort of 70s. And he was like, he's like, I've got even more racist in the last 10 years. And he's like, and I just don't have the energy to fight it. And I was like, what self-awareness, and yet on another level, what utter giving up, to be able to say, I've got more racist, but I don't care anymore. I'm 70 and I give up. Like, it's tough, Do you have thoughts on how we fight?
I do.
That? Like,
well, I think there's two. I think one is practical. One of the things that I said over and over again during the Trump era in this country was that leadership matters. Leadership matters. Okay. You are right. We are busy. We are burdened. We're trying to get ourselves up, get to work, do good things in the world, take care of children, help our aging parents, better ourselves, read a book once in a while, catch up with friends, have a good relationship. Okay, we're going to try and do all that and stay up to date on every local, state, and national political issue. That's hard. Leadership matters. Leadership matters. We need leaders who have integrity, who have a willingness to reflect on these things, because we have elected them as the leaders to do that. That's it. I don't want anyone ever in my lifetime to ever again say that, oh, it doesn't really matter who's president or who's in Congress. It's all just a perfunctory kind of role. No, leadership matters, and it trickles down. 1 year and a day ago, Donald Trump got on the TV and said, maybe we should drink bleach to get rid of coronavirus. Leadership matters. Maybe we should blast our lungs with light to get rid of coronavirus. Leadership matters, right? So that's number one, I think. Number two is education matters. So, okay, we can, and I'm willing to fight the tides. I'm willing to have the conversation of what happens after you're 40. I think there are ways we can still learn and grow. And I think that'd be a great conversation. From your background and mine, I think we'd have really interesting sort of back and forth there. But I think before we go there, I think it's, okay, what are we doing before age of 40? What are we doing? Right? How are we cultivating young people? How are we cultivating ourselves in that time? Are we instilling those values of diversity and inclusion? Are we instilling those values of not being afraid of what's new? Are we giving people exposure, right, to racial and ethnic and sexual and gender minorities, right? So they realize this is not a big bad other. This is a human being. This is my trans friend, right? This is my gay friend. This is my polyamorous friend, right? This is my mixed race friend. This is my Afro-Caribbean friend. Blah, 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 blah. If we're doing that before 40, then as you said, after 40, we've already set the table to kind of carry on in that direction.
Right.
That seems really important.
Yeah, no, that's huge. And I think that's something we'll wind up now because I'm aware of the time, but that seems something that's it is the thing that gives me hope. The number one thing is I just need to look 10 years younger than me, 20 years younger than me. And I go, oh my God, hopefully all of my generation can die off soon and everyone as well. And we can let this lot get in charge. If we can get this lot in charge, global warming will be over before, we blink. I don't have to ask a single 15-year-old in the entire world, everyone I've met, any 15-year-old, I'm like, hey, what do you think about plastic straws or plastic bottles? Or what do you think about Nestle? And they're like, fuck Nestle, stop using plastic straws. Of course we need to change the climate. They're aware, they've got it. They're like, oh, do you think trans rights are important? What do you mean? That's a question. How old are you? That's the answer that I'll get. I won't even get well, of course. They're shocked that a human asks that question, and it does fill me with hope that I don't know if it's they're being raised on the internet, or even in rural areas, they're watching Netflix and YouTube and Instagram, and that's their education, right? TikTok, and it doesn't matter. They're being exposed to these things in ways that, gosh, we never were. Never mind our parents and whoever else. It's
leadership matters, education matters, representation matters. So it's really hard to tell a 15-year-old kid that trans people are from the devil and that mixed race people are from the devil if they have been exposed to those folks through the media they watch, through the people they look up to, through the folks that they found at school, that there are folks willing to come out as 15-year-olds, as gay, as bi, as trans, etc. And all of a sudden, how do you change, right, the feelings and the affect of the 16-year-old who was like, what do you mean? Climate change, white supremacy, and LGBTQ prejudice are things that I just can't, no, that's just a no for me, because I have been formed in a way that makes those values incongruent with who I am. Representation matters in that way. Our Christian elders taught us to be afraid of the media that had representations of different lifestyles, and they were right. Because if you, I mean, lifestyles is the wrong word, different identities, different ways of living, right? If you read too many books and you see too many folks represented, they're not demonic, they're human, they're just people. So representation matters a lot.
Yeah, no, that's so true. I mean, you see it all the time. How many Christians have said, oh, I had to bail because I got to know some gay people. And I was like, geez, these people are not the evil person my pastor told me, right? They're running around killing people in back alleys because gay people are evil. And it's like, that was, first of all, you probably overplayed your hand. But second of all, no, of course. And so, yeah, absolutely. I think you're spot on. Gosh, the amount of times I heard words like the gay agenda or whatever and things like that from my pastors. And it was farcical to me because I had people that in my life that I was like, but they're gay and they're just like me. And great. Actually, a lot of them are much, much nicer and better than me. Gosh, I'm not that great a person. So yeah, no, absolutely. Bradley, I have loved this conversation. It's been really, really fun. I feel like there's a whole host of things we didn't even begin to touch on that we could have gone into, and a whole world of topics that I'm sure we could talk about forever. Maybe we'll have you back on at some point in the future, but how can people connect with you? How can people track what you're doing? Or you're on social media? You've got a couple podcasts you're involved in. Is that right?
So my main show is Straight White American Jesus, and we basically have 2 or 3 episodes a week. So on Fridays we have a weekly roundup focused on politics. We have an interview show every week, for the most part, with a scholar of religion, a journalist, an ex-evangelical, someone. And so you can find us on Twitter at Straight White JC. You can find me at Bradley Onishi. You can find us on Instagram under Straight White JC as well. And so, yeah, those are my main gigs. I'm writing a book on how white Christian nationalism helped create MAGA Nation. So that'll be out in a little while. And yeah, that's kind of my main stuff. I'm honored to have been here, Phil. So I just want to say thanks for inviting me, and thanks for having me on. I appreciate the work you're doing, and I feel like we're in the same realm, but we have just different roles in that realm in some sense. And I really appreciate all you're doing for the community.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. And honestly, I appreciate what you're doing. I think that what you're focusing on and doing is so important, and I love that you have this amazing passion for this world. It's exciting to see. It's exciting to see you tackling such really important topics as well. It's such important work, and I've heard from so many people. I talk to people day in, day out, and so many of them mention your podcast. They mention what you're doing. So absolutely. And you've got a couple of other books that are out already as well. Do you want to give them a bit of a plug, and so people know what they're about? Because some of them touch on some of the stuff we've talked about, right?
Yeah, they do. I mean, I have a book out called The Sacrality of the Secular. That's from Columbia University Press. I will warn you, it's a very boring book. So
is it more academic?
If you want to read some heavy philosophy, I have a lot of friends who are like, oh, I'm going to get your book and read it, man. And I'm like, no, you're not. Don't do that. Get a beer, go to the beach, and enjoy your life. Don't read that book. I would rather you read. I published a couple of op-eds in the New York Times on these issues. I just published a piece at the Revealer on evangelical masculinity in the wake of the Atlanta massacre. There's a whole section on God's penis. So, hey, if nothing else, check that out. So check out the writing at the New York Times, check out the writing at the Revealer, check out the writing at the HuffPost, The Conversation. I wrote about the soulmate myth. That stuff is probably more exciting than a book about
more accessible.
Yeah, I'm
always on the lookout for more accessible writing. Let's be honest, we all are, right? Even when you're in academia, you're like, oh, thank God, there's less footnotes in this.
I am not above saying I wrote a very boring book, and that's how it goes. That's what happened.
That's funny. And do you have a way for people to support you? Do you have a Patreon or something like that?
We do. We could always use your support. If you go to straightwhiteamericanjesus.com, you'll find our Patreon, and you'll find our PayPal, and we have some big changes coming up, and that support will mean more than ever as we move forward. So yeah.
Perfect. So make sure you do that as well, everyone listening. So yeah, don't buy his book. Send him
Yeah.
$15 via Patreon.
No. Do whatever you want. Do whatever you want.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Bradley, this has been fantastic. I really enjoyed it. Hopefully we'll stay in touch. I'll let you know when it comes out, probably in a week or so, maybe 2 weeks. I'm getting a bit more on top of my schedule. I got a bit close. I got close to the wire, but
yeah. No. Just let me know and I'll promote it as best I can. I will
sure.
I'll send you this file here in a little bit. And
perfect. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
All right.
Wonderful.
Thanks, Phil.
Well, have a good one, man. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Too. All right.
Peace.
Take it easy. Bye.
Bye. If you are deconstructing, there is no reason to do this alone. It can be an incredibly lonely process, but the deconstructionnetwork.com is a free resource to help you find others deconstructing in your local area. If you would like to support what I do, everything I do is for free, from talking to people for hours on end to producing resources and podcasts. It is only possible because people give generously. There's never any need to give. It will always be free, everything I do. But if you do, we do have an amazing private community group that we talk on over on Discord that you would gain access to. And we do regular audio and video chats on there as well. So it'd be great to see you in there. But of course, never any requirement. And of course, please come and talk to me on Instagram. I love connecting with people. I love helping people on their journey. If you need a safe space to process your deconstruction, I would love to connect. It's just at Phil Drysdale. Love every one of you. Peace.